Thanks for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Mark Martin. Today, more storms striking the Midwest as volunteers help out in Kentucky in the search for those still missing. And a sign of hope as a cross remains standing at a church after the tornadoes. Higher interest rates are coming as the Federal Reserve tries to fight inflation. One financial expert tells CBN News the government has simply been spending too much money. Plus, if you haven't gotten the COVID vaccine in some countries in Europe, you could be living under a lockdown and face severe consequences.
I'm not allowed to work anywhere anymore, really, without providing a proof of vaccination or recovery.
But at the same time, the opposition to these strict measures is growing. And in Israel, an outreach to those in need.
What we do here is what God said in Exodus 22. Listen, hear the voice of the orphan and the widow. And God says, I hear their voice. You listen to their voice. And this is our obligation.
How this group works to fulfill that biblical mandate. Those stories and more today on CBN NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin with more damaging weather striking the Midwest and Great Plains Wednesday as a powerful storm system swept across the region, closing highways in western Kansas and spawning reported tornadoes in Iowa and Nebraska. High winds outside Omaha left thousands without power, and people took shelter as the storm blew through the area.
It shook the whole house.
So my mom and I ran into the interior room, which is our hall closet, and we were in there when I could hear the wind picking up. So when we ran in there, you could hear the crash and things were falling off the shelf onto our heads, and I thought our house was gone. I mean, honestly, it was so scary. I just instantly started crying. I just thought, I was waiting for the house to fall on us, honestly. We were just praying inside. We were
and shaking so bad.
Wow, and much of the town of Neola, Iowa, also without power as dozens of buildings there were damaged by heavy winds. President Biden visited Kentucky Wednesday, announcing the federal government will cover 100% of the cost of all emergency work for the next 30 days. One guiding light still appeared in the midst of the tragedy as a cross remained standing at a church. As people pick up the pieces left by the Midwest tornado outbreak, loved ones are still searching for the more than 100 people still missing. CBN's Brody Carter shows us how thousands of volunteers are doing their part to help.
6 days since the storm, and focus is shifting from the damage left behind to the men and women stepping up to help from all over, cooking free meals, picking up debris, or helping search for those still missing.
And something that feels pretty therapeutic. We're actually hauling some of this debris out of town. Hauling a little bit of that chaos and devastation and death out of town.
Where the shock of losing a home and a business, the grief of losing someone, it's happening right before the holidays, I said, and we're going to make sure that you have all the help you need, including the kind of mental help that's needed to help people through difficult times.
Wednesday, President Biden made stops in the hardest-hit areas of Kentucky, promising to uphold his emergency declaration. Mr. Biden walked the streets of Mayfield, Princeton, and Dawson Springs, talking with survivors and mourning with those who've lost everything.
CBN's Operation Blessing delivering relief supplies to First Baptist Church in Dawson Springs, Kentucky.
We were providing some food items, comfort items for warmth. We're providing water. We're providing Home Depot buckets so that they can begin the process of restoring their lives to some sort of normalcy.
Even in the darkest of times, people are finding a guiding light. This cross at Mayfield's First Baptist Church left standing, a symbol of hope during life's darkest storms. And consider this man's peace and worship after losing everything.
I don't want to face this storm or any other without walking with Christ. And so in those trying times and even in the good times, that's where I want to be found.
Jordan and his family survived by taking shelter in his basement with only a mattress for protection. His praise and thanksgiving is bringing hope to those here and beyond.
I play often. Music is important to me, specifically Christian music. My faith is very important to me. Played the song for me, just to get a quiet moment by myself. But I think I guess it's brought some peace and comfort to a lot of folks that are facing some really difficult situations right now.
He was playing that song, There's Something About That Name, Jesus. In other news, the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates to try to bring down the high inflation that's been hitting the economy. Many have pointed to supply chain problems as the cause for higher prices, but Republicans and some Democrats say big government spending has helped drive up inflation. That's put the brakes on the president's massive Build Back Better social spending bill, at least for now.
It's a question of how much their own party is going to end up being the roadblock to it. And thank goodness we've got a couple moderate Democrats left, because if it weren't for Manchin and Sinema, this would already be a done deal.
Coming up, more on that #1 issue for Americans across the country, rising prices. CBN's Gary Lane talks to financial expert Dan Celia about whether we can expect inflation to ease up anytime soon. We'll hear his outlook when we come back. Welcome back. With Christmas fast approaching, Americans are finding they're paying more for just about everything this year, in many cases, a lot more. The November inflation rate stands at 6.8%. We're paying 12.5% more than a year ago for meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. Housing rental costs are the highest since 2007, and prices at the pump have skyrocketed, up 58% over this time last year. Appearing on this week's episode of The Global Lane, Financial Issues national radio and TV host Dan Celia talks about whether he expects inflation to cool down anytime soon.
None of this is good. 9.6% producer price index is astounding. And, the vast majority of this, not all of it, the vast majority of it is not temporary. It is here to stay. The majority of it is due to wages. Yes, there are some pressure from supply chains and bottlenecks in that supply chain. And yes, that causes a bit of inflation. But look, we've had money too cheap, too fast, too long, and it continues to devalue the dollar. The Federal Reserve continues to buy debt. We're facing another $2 trillion spending bill. So more debt on top of that, $2 trillion that the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, says it's going to cost us $3.4 trillion for that, when the administration says it's going to cost zero. So we continue to see the spending. The inflation is going to continue, and we have no jobs being created, only jobs being desired. We're at 11.2 million job openings, all-time record high, and nobody is filling those jobs. Remember that 9.6 number I just gave you, Gary, and you pointed out before we came on that, look, that's a November number. So I would suspect by the end of December, and we get that number in January, it's probably going to be double digits. And we're going to continue to see that go up.
Dan,
and it's interesting.
Let me ask you about the unemployment rate, though. That's down to 4.2%. But we know the November job growth was weak. A new survey by McKinsey shows almost half of employed Americans say they're not working due to health reasons, physically and mentally. And 37% say they've been diagnosed with mental health issues or have sought mental health treatment. Wow. It seems the pandemic has taken a toll on the U.S. labor force. So how concerned are you about that?
Well, that's going to be our biggest problem that economists and analysts believe that we have, and politicians believe we have, is not there at all. Or we wouldn't be seeing such low unemployment rate. Look, the unemployment rate is low because we have clobbered our labor participation. So remember, unemployment is factored on a bigger number. So the unemployment number is going down. So this is what happened in 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So we're seeing that same effect. We're going to have a very low labor participation rate, and we don't see any end in sight. The people that were laid off just as the pandemic started early on, the vast majority of them still aren't back to work.
Dan, what's your predictions for 2022? Will inflation moderate? Will our economy continue to grow at a robust rate?
I think our economy is not going to grow at all, but I think inflation will begin to subside. So it'll probably be, at best case scenario, late third quarter, but likely into the fourth quarter, inflation may start settling down and dropping a bit, primarily because of supply chain pickup, and hopefully we'll get some energy picking back up again.
Not to mention an election coming up.
Yes, that always
third,
helps.
Fourth quarter. Dan Celia, national radio and TV host of Financial Issues. Good talking with you again, Dan, and we appreciate you. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Gary. Always appreciate being with you. Thank you.
And you can see more about important issues in the world, including the crisis at the southern border, by watching The Global Lane tonight at 8:30 Eastern on the CBN News Channel or on the CBN News app. Still ahead, if you're unvaccinated in Europe, you could be living under lockdowns and facing fines, possibly even jail time. But many people are protesting. We'll have that story right after this. Thanks for staying with us. They're living under lockdown with no full access to society or jobs, and they're facing fines and even jail. That's what the unvaccinated are up against in many European countries, and the backlash is growing. Dale Hurd reports on the escalating crackdowns and the rising protests.
When I talked to American Alicia Duran and her German husband Andreas, they were packing, trying to get out of Germany as quickly as possible with their 3 children. They've had enough of Germany's strict COVID policies. Europe is in the midst of an uprising of the unvaccinated, pitting citizens who refuse to get the jab against governments that want the pandemic to end. And neither side is backing down. Nation by nation, Europe is turning into a 2-tiered society in which those who refuse to be vaccinated will live under lockdown, without full access to society or jobs, facing fines and even jail. The Durans are leaving Germany after Andreas became unable to work because of COVID restrictions.
I'm not allowed to work anywhere anymore, really, without providing a proof of vaccination or recovery.
Well, there's also no more privacy. Like, you go into the bakery and the cashier will loudly ask you for your vaccine pass if you want to go have a cup of coffee. And
are you vaccinated?
No, like, very loudly. The discrimination is terrible.
It's a similar story across Europe. In Italy, the unvaccinated now must take a COVID test every 48 hours if they want to live a free life. Gunnar Beck, a German member of the European Parliament, calls Europe's COVID policies dangerously authoritarian.
I mean, we're not talking about the Black Death here. I'm not even sure the Black Death would warrant the effective suspension of the rule of law, constitutional government, and democracy.
Austria is ground zero for the world's toughest COVID policies. The unvaccinated have already been in lockdown for almost a month. And next year will have to pay $4,000 in fines every 3 months unless they not only get vaccinated, but get booster shots. Eric Hewitt is an American living in Austria with his wife and 5 children.
The government is attempting to transform the society into a totalitarian police state.
Hewitt's unvaccinated children have been kicked out of music school for refusing daily COVID tests. When shopping, their family is only allowed to enter grocery stores and pharmacies.
The toy store wouldn't let my wife in to buy a toy for a birthday.
Medical privacy, still a law in Austria, has been breached by the government. The state knows who has and who hasn't been vaccinated. And there are fears the government will use vaccine passports to include new Chinese-style digital identities. Catholic activist Alexander Chuguel says Austrians have become the lab rats of the Western world and believes the Austrian experiment will spread.
Do you want a government which enforces things like abortion, homosexual marriage, other things? So a government which definitely shows that they do not only not follow the teaching of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, but rather fight against it. Do you want them to have every information available and full control of where you're allowed to go and where you're not allowed to go, like in China? I say no, and that's the reason we go and protest.
Hewitt has decided to stay in Austria and fight.
God has placed me at a critical battle in the spiritual war. The whole society is becoming this inhuman machine based on fear and repression. And so what I want to restore a human society.
But the Durans in Germany have had enough.
It's beautiful when people want to stay and fight, but we feel like the fight is lost here.
They see Germany laying the groundwork for its own nationwide vaccine mandate that could include children. Germany's COVID restrictions have been so draconian, this German mother says her 10-year-old daughter wants to die. Beck believes if Germany introduces a vaccine mandate, the EU will follow with a European-wide mandate. Most Europeans are vaccinated, although far fewer have gotten boosters. In Sweden, enthusiastic citizens are voluntarily injecting their vaccine passports into their hands in the form of readable microchips. The protests against Europe's COVID policies are now as far-flung as Barcelona to Brussels to Kiev in Ukraine to Zagreb in the Balkans, where this Croatian IT expert said, "I came here to fight against fascism, totalitarianism, these insane restrictions, and insane politicians." Protesters are demanding what they used to take for granted: freedom. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Coming up, it's an outreach to widows and orphans in Israel. We'll tell you who's behind it and why they do it when we come back. Stay with us. The Brave, that's the name of an outreach in Israel to widows and orphans. Once a week, volunteers supply food and love to hurting Israelis. So what's the motivation behind this movement? Chris Mitchell explains from Jerusalem.
Once a week, this home is filled with kids playing, parents meeting, and volunteers helping. It's called Amitzim, which in Hebrew means the brave. The goal of Amitzim is to fulfill the biblical mandate found in the scriptures to embrace and strengthen the widows and orphans. About 12,000 families in Israel have suffered the death of a parent.
What we do here is what God said in Exodus 22. Listen, hear the voice of the orphan and the widow. And God says, I hear their voice. You listen to their voice. And this is our obligation.
Hadass Glick began this effort several years ago. Her husband died in 2001 from a stroke. Yehuda's wife died in 2018, and later he and Hadass married. Now this former widow and widower reach out to these families in need.
We understand how strong of a power and effect a father means to his children, a mother means for her children, and so we come to give a hand and to strengthen, but not to replace.
Netanel has been a widower for 3.5 years.
I quickly understood that this was a place where they spoil us. They have, good fruit and food cut out for us. We don't have to work because we're on 24/7. When you're raising 3 children on your own, you don't really get any time to rest. And I could sit down and my kids wouldn't be on top of me as they are all the time. It was a place where I could rest. And then I found that it wasn't just a place where I could rest, it was a place where I could be amongst peers, amongst people that have had a similar experience to mine, which provides a sort of safety.
My husband passed away 2 years ago. We have 2 daughters, one 8 and one 6 years old. We got to know the Amitzim Club. It's really good for us here. They take care of us. They provide for us. It's really encouraging that there is a group of widows and widowers here that together, once a week, help each other. I'm really happy that I met Yehuda and Hadass. They are, for me, simply amazing people.
Trained volunteers serve hot meals and love.
They open the heart. They come to open the heart. They come to get warmth from us, from all the volunteers here. We come every Wednesday, meet the people. We know them. We know their names. We ask if they are not coming. They're surprised if we call. Why didn't you come last week? Oh, this week I will come. I will come this week. And they are very happy from this place.
13-year-old Hila lost her mother 2 years ago to cancer. For her and her dog Louie, it's a safe place.
It's nice to be in the company of equals.
And what's your favorite activity here?
The chatting.
It helps the people here that Hadass and Yehuda clearly know the devastating loss of a spouse.
When we see these orphans and widows, and I just sit around and talk to them, they're alone, nobody remembers them. And here is somebody who's caring for them and remembering them, and it gives them strength. You can't believe. Then they go back home and they're like a new person.
We realize that when you don't have a father or you don't have a mother, the home needs support. What we're doing here is making a new concept, rebuilding the Torah words into reality.
They look to Isaiah the prophet who said, "Learn to do good, seek justice, rebuke the oppressor, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow." Glick feels the goals of Amitzim go hand in hand with the Shalom Jerusalem Foundation that he founded. It seeks to build up Jerusalem and increase Jewish access to the Temple Mount.
The Bible refers to an orphan, but it always says the orphan and the widow. It says when you're celebrating with me your holiday at the temple, include the orphan and the widow. When you're bringing your harvest, don't forget to include the orphan and the widow.
Hadass and Yehuda hope to establish 10 centers like this one throughout Israel. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Amitzim Center, Jerusalem.
Wonderful to see that biblical mandate played out there. Well, that's it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. Remember, you can find more of our news programs on the CBN News Channel anytime or online with cbnnews.com. And tell us what you think about the stories you've seen by emailing newswatch@cbn.com. Or you can talk to us on social media. Hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day.